G'day guys, it's Taylor here from ADRENO, and today we're going to be going over Cray loops. So Cray loops themselves have been heavily used in the states of WA and have been allowed in South Australia for a very long time with great success. What Cray loops allow you to do is to get into harder to reach spaces, tighter cracks, and allow you to harvest that crayfish very, very easily. As you can see, the difference between my hand and the Cray loop itself, you can really get into some of those tight spots, especially when you take into consideration how large your body is in comparison to this guy outstretched, compared to me inside the crack, reaching all the way forward. The general gist of a Cray loop is we have your loop end, we have your push rod, we have a spring inside of your Cray loop, and that is what is holding tension on this spring here, allowing it to return back to a closed state. So when we're going in to harvest crayfish, we're coming in over the top from the side, whichever angle that you decide when you approach that crayfish is the easiest way for you to take that crayfish. When we're looking at Cray loops themselves, we've got right here, we have the Old Man Blue, which come in ranging from 70 centimeters up to 2 meters. And we have the Odysseus Cray loops in a short and a long. Effectively a 120 and a 200 centimeter Cray loop. With these guys, again, it is completely up to the spot that you're diving. If you know you're going to some really, really deep cracks, the longer the loop, the better. The shorter loop I find is very, very easy to use when free diving. So I try and keep mine between that 1 meter and 150 centimeters. And I find that is one of the easiest to use whilst free diving. Now, looking at the two different brands, there's a bit of history behind them. Odysseus have been making Cray loops for the Australian market for a very, very long time, one of the first. They now make their Cray loops in South Africa, which have a massive, massive and fantastic history in spearfishing equipment. You then move on to the Old Man Blue, and you have Bert in WA who's manufacturing these in Australia. They're a 316 stainless steel, everywhere through to the spring itself. I find between the two loops themselves, I've had great success with both. I really like the heavier tension on the spring of the Old Man Blue. What I find the biggest benefit of that is I typically will be using my loop like so. Once I have my Cray, I'm letting go of that push rod once it's walked back in to the loop itself. I also do really prefer the tighter angle that the Old Man Blue sends the wire out at. You can see between the Odysseus and the Old Man Blue that this one naturally goes as close to 90 degrees behind the fish as possible. So there's a few techniques that you can use. Approaching that crayfish, you'll have to make the choice at the time. You can go over and between the antennas of the lobster. You can come in from the side. I've even been able to push loops in under the sand, come back out underneath, wait for that Cray to walk through and let go. Now the biggest benefit of that heavier spring for me is that if for some reason when you let go of your Cray loop, your Cray will then be kicking pretty heavily inside that loop. These guys are designed pretty well for minimum 76 mil carapace lobsters, which is the minimum size in WA. With these guys, there's a few other little things that I really like as well. You've got orientation lines on the handles themselves, which tell you as the diver which way your loop is coming out. That's really handy when you actually can't see the back of your loop if it's a really deep cave. So I know that if I keep this blue line here, I can be pushing in and out, and I know that if I can see the head of that crayfish, I can see roughly where my loop is. I know the positioning of that Cray in relation to my loop. One more design that I really like on the Old Man Blue is that Bert has welded on a clip at the rear of the push rod. So this allows you to hang your Cray loop from your float, whether you're shore diving or even diving from a boat. You have the opportunity to be able to take your Cray loop, take a spear gun, shoot a few whiting while grabbing a few Crays. With Cray loops, Obviously the benefits are going to be that you can reach crays in harder, tighter locations within your dive. But one of the biggest benefits that I find is that you can really choose the resource that you're taking from our reefs. You can ensure that the crayfish doesn't have tar spot, it doesn't have berries, it's not a soft shell, or it's not of size. You're able to pull that crayfish from its location, check if it meets all these requirements, whether it meets up with regulations or not. And that allows you to make a better decision when it comes to our fisheries laws, but it also allows us as divers to make an ethical and sustainable decision when we're trying to provide food for ourselves and our families. So when it comes to cray loops, they're really the biggest things that I would look at is the angle at the business end of your cray loop, the tension on that push rod, how smooth is it? And again, remember these are all handmade, so check them one by one. You might prefer another one more than the other. So a few general tips whilst using your cray loop. Once you're approaching your cray, you found the one you want to grab. You don't want to open the loop until you've got the loop itself behind the crayfish. So enter your cave, come in behind. Once you're behind the tail, open it as far as you can. Hold, 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 wait for it to walk through. Let go, and it's always beneficial to hold that push rod. You want to hold tension there so that if there is any kicking from the crayfish on the other side, there is at least a little bit of tension here. Again, this is why I really like the Old Man Blue. If I'm a little bit slow on the day, it does have quite a bit of tension as it stands to hold that crayfish in there and make sure you don't lose it. You can also use these guys, I find, especially with Western rock lobsters, is that you can kind of herd the crayfish itself. Some will be easier than others, straight in, loop open, bang, harvested. Some will be quite flighty, and I can find that even if I start by going through the antennas, you'll start to see their antennas touch, and they may start to move a little bit. This does allow you though to roll and move with the crayfish itself. By grabbing this cray behind the carapace at the base of the tail is much better than grabbing big crays by the horns and snapping them off, especially if you can't retrieve that cray. A cray with a severely damaged horn, damage to its carapace, probably won't survive. So these guys again allow us to harvest our fish as sustainably as possible. So guys, when it comes to the cray loops themselves as well, they come in a range of shapes and sizes, anywhere from 70 centimeters to 2 meters in the Old Man Blue, and you have a small and a large from Odysseus. I always find, say for free diving, I try and keep it nice and short, about that 150 max. I really do like the 120 or the 1 meter. The 70 centimeter itself is a no frills cray loop. It doesn't have a spring in it, so it's very much a manual cray loop. But again, if this works better for you, especially as freedivers or spearfishermen, it's a keep it simple, stupid kind of design. You cannot fail. There is nothing in the product to fail. Long term, sometimes you get a bit of grittiness and sand in the springs of these guys. Making sure that you're keeping fresh water through it will make it last longer. But the 70 centimeter with no spring on the push rod is a keep it simple, stupid design. Cannot fail. For me, so when I'm freediving, again, I really like to keep it under 150 centimeters. If I was scuba diving in WA, going to harvest crays, and I knew that I was going to a Swiss cheese kind of rock, I could see 10 meters underneath, I would try and take the longest loop that I could. Again, I have air, I have time, I can really see what I'm doing. So those longer loops can help you get those crays out of those deeper cracks. So there's a few tips that you can use on your loop itself. Every single loop will also do this. When you're extending out, see how, as it stands, this is unfurling towards the camera. As I spin the loop itself, you'll see that it actually rolls over. So depending on the situation or where your cray is or how it's moving, you can use this to your advantage. So what I'm doing here is I'm just spinning that push rod, and what that does is that turns that cray loop away from you or towards you. This can really help, especially on those bigger crays, making sure you get under the tail itself, move it forward, let that rod go. We're on. So guys, we've gone over the range of cray loops here. If you're struggling with what size and what design works best for you, don't hesitate to get on in store or give us a call and we can try and help you out with what will work for you. Overall though, like I said, this will help the success rate of the diver. And if you don't believe me, get on in and try one out for yourself.